Hey guys, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about hydroponics, and I am going to show you how to set up a hydroponic system like this that you could make out of materials that you find at home or at your local stores. So when we look at hydroponics, hydro, that references water. We're using water in a growing system that we're going to use to produce plants. Now, what I think is interesting about that is, if I were to ask someone, a child, someone in class, really anybody, what do plants need to survive? You would tell me things like they need sun, they need air that has carbon dioxide, and most people would say that plants need soil. But technically they don't. And that's what we're gonna see in a hydroponic unit, is that plants can grow in completely soilless environments. And there's lots of specializations and adaptations for different types of water-based growing systems. Some are called like aquaculture or aeroponics. Those use slightly different technologies, but the idea is the same. We're going to use water with nutrients in the water in place of the soil. Because when you think about it, as plants grow roots, the point of the root is to grow out and absorb water and minerals and nutrients that are in the soil. So if we can create an environment where plants get plenty of water with those same nutrients, they will grow fine, even though there's not a stitch of soil in this environment. So as we look at hydroponics units, they're really an innovation. It's not a new technology, but it's an innovative technology, and it's one that we continue to improve. As we look at some of the benefits of hydroponic growth system, we find that we can grow a lot more food in a lot less space. In this system itself, we're going to have 12 plants of different types of herbs. Instead of having a 4-foot by 4-foot garden outside, we're going to do it in a bin on the countertop. And as we look at some of the latest advances, you can look at examples in places like Detroit, Michigan, where people are taking old warehouses and setting up huge, massive hydroponic growth systems inside. And the plants can be stacked just right on top of each other. And they don't need a lot of space to produce a mountain of food, which is amazing. And so maybe that's something we'll see more of as some of these industries move and switch and become remote. That would be a cool use for an old building. I'd love to go see one, right? If you've ever been to Disney World, they have a huge section that's all about hydroponics in an indoor garden. And so it's a really neat way to grow a lot of different types of foods in a very small environment. It does have to be protected, so it has to typically be indoors, but it allows us to produce a lot, which is really cool, and we're getting better at it all the time. We are also improving access to food through the growth of hydroponically produced materials. Whenever we look at really dense urban areas, sometimes it can be hard to get fresh food into those places. And so if we can grow the food there using some of the space that's already been made available, like the warehouses I was telling you about in Detroit, that's a way that we can provide food to inner city neighborhoods that maybe don't have the same access as somebody who's living on the outskirts of town and they have lots of space to grow their own garden. So that's a cool idea as well. We're also able to control things like pests much more acutely. When we look at pests, a lot of those are soil-borne pathogens, so they come from the soil that the plant is living in. And we'll see that some pests will feed on the leaves, but if you have a plant that has a pest infection in a hydroponic unit, you just take the plant out, throw it away, put a new one in. So it makes it a little easier to control your pests. You can conserve water. We're not letting the water just go on the ground and then be absorbed down. Instead, we recycle it through this bin and through a tube system, and every once in a while we'll add more nutrients to it. So in a place like West Texas, and where we're looking at water scarcity and what that means for our long-term life here, being able to conserve that water, that's a really good thing. We can also control runoff and pollution and making sure that that pollution's not getting into our food by having these closed systems, and we can make sure that our plants are as healthy as possible. So that's some of the reasons we like to learn about hydroponics and we want to grow food hydroponically. Now let's talk about how we do it. So this is a kit that I ordered, and in it I've got a number of different materials we're going to use, but I'm just going to go through and set this up with you, and we'll talk about what I'm doing as we go. To begin, I have my bin. This bin has been set up and pre-drilled with holes. The holes are where we're going to put our plants. So this is just a little Sterilite bin. It is a 15-quart or 14-liter bin. You could probably buy this at your local home store. So I think Walmart or big box store, right? So we're going to take this, and I'm going to take these net pots, which you can order. Oh, don't roll too far. Let me get it. You can order these from Amazon or get it from a greenhouse supplier. But I'm gonna take these little net pots before I throw any more of them. I'm gonna set them down into the lid of our hydroponic unit. This is where our plants are gonna sit. So our plants are gonna grow in these little net pots where there's plenty of solution moving through, and then the roots are gonna have room to spread out. Cool. All right, first step done, pretty easy. Now, into these pots, we're gonna place this rock wool. And so rock wool has been used as insulation. It's these little kind of blocks. You can get this again from a greenhouse store. But we see that this rock wool grow block is not only good for keeping, you know, the heat inside your house or the cold inside your house, we can also take this and we can grow things in it. And so I'm gonna remove the covering from the rock wool block and just slide it out. And you can see it's just this little block. And now it does kind of look like insulation, like what you'd find in your walls, but it doesn't have fiberglass, so it's not gonna make you itchy or anything. I'm gonna take this and kind of break it apart a little bit. There's the hole. I just want to kind of round it out, not rough it up, but round it out so it'll fit in my little net pot, right? And I'm going to push it down. And you can see that it's just set down a little bit from the rim. We want it within about 2 to 3 centimeters of the rim, right? So that way our little plant's getting plenty of moisture. I'm going to keep doing that for all of my containers. So I've got 12 of them, so I'm going to do this 12 times. Okay, now I have some to save for next time I do this. Okay, so finishing up, I'm gonna put all the rock wool down into the little pots, spread it out with my fingers, just filling up the little pot so it doesn't have to stay in that perfect cube shape. Okay, so now I've set up my tray for the growing to happen in. Now I'm gonna set up my air stones, and these are going to provide oxygen to the roots of my plants. And so you'll find these at your local pet stores. Really easy. I mean, even your big box stores will have these, particularly places like Walmart where you can buy a little bit of everything. They will be in the fish section, but these air stones are really neat. I put it on the package. And I use them a lot in different experiments because they're good at providing oxygen to the roots of the plants I'm working in, or if I have, you know, a little aquaculture system where I have fish and plants together. There. There's one. Okay, so you can see it's just like a porous stone, and this is a stone that as we push air through it, it'll make little bubbles that come out and will float through the water, and it's just the right size plants need. So those little bubbles are what we are after. I always think of Finding Nemo when I think of bubbles in a little tank solution. Now one fish that liked all the bubbles and went crazy, he'd like these. So get this one out. Got my little trash pile over here, so don't mind that. Okay, so we have 2 of these air stones, and I'm going to put them in the bottom of the tank. So I'm going to just lift the lid off, set that in front. I'm going to take these 2 stones, and I'm going to lay them inside of the tank, and they have these little tube connectors, and I'm going to face those opposite directions. So I've got one pointed this way, one pointed this way. Then I'm going to take my flexible tubing and I'm going to attach it to the ends of the air stone. So I've got one tube, just one big long tube. So I'm going to cut it in half. I'm going to cut this down quite a bit actually because I don't need a lot of space. And I'm just going to push that on, okay? And then the tube should go, let's see. Oh, there it is. Okay, so there's one side. So I'm going to take the other side of my tubing and I'm going to hook it to this air stone. So just sliding it on. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut, just try to get right in the middle of these. I really don't need this tube to be quite this long. It's a little bit overkill as it is. But that will, I want to make sure I have enough to connect it to my air pump. So I'm going to just drape it down back here on this side of the table so I can kind of get a good idea of the lengths that I want. And I really want this to come to about there. I think that's plenty to sit on the table. Okay, so I've cut my tube, so now I have 2 ends, and then I'm going to cut one more small piece, and this is to make a T where I can join all of these pieces together and connect it to the pump. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to flatten that edge. All right, here's my air pump that I'm going to be using, and then from the same aquarium store, I've got this little T. That's how I'm going to join all of the tubing to the air pump itself. So I'm going to push this out. You can see it's just this little blue T-shaped structure. Okay, I'm going to connect one end of the tubing to the T. And then the other. And then I have this little bit that's left over that's going to go on the point, if you will. So the 2 air stones go to the edges of the T. Then this piece is what's going to attach to the air pump, which will sit on the table. And so that's where we're going to get oxygen to cycle through to supply oxygen to the roots so that they can absorb it and use it for cellular respiration. It'll also help prevent rot because we don't want root rot to happen. It just keeps the air and the nutrients circulating around. Okay. So this is what our air pump looks like. And so that little extension is going to attach to that air pump right there. And once we plug it in, it's going to cycle the oxygen through. I'm going to wait to do this part until we get to our final setup. I'm going to set this back here because that's where it's going to go. Okay, so I have my tubing kind of laid out. I've got an idea of how I want everything. I'm not ready to put the lid on because I want to go ahead and add my solutions to my reservoir. We're going to plant all of this today. So in my 2 yellow jugs here, each of them has 4 liters of water. And into that water, I'm going to mix 2 different solutions. So we'll have a solution A and a solution B. Their concentrations are the same. I'm going to take 10 milliliters of my Aqua Vega solution A. So I'll go ahead and show you what that looks like. So I have like a little medicine cup. Probably you have one of these at your house or you've seen one before, right? And to that, I'm going to pour in 10 mils. So to the 10 ml line. Okay, so not too terribly much. But I'm going to pour that into this first tank. This will be my solution A. I'm actually going to take my cup, just dip it down in there, mix it all around. Okay, so that's solution A. I'm going to do the exact same thing for solution B. And I'm going to mix those separately, and then we're going to combine them in the tank. And this is the nutrient solution that we're going to supply to our plants. So as this solution circulates around, this is going to have all the nutrients that the plants would normally get from the soil, but we're just having to add those in. And here in a few weeks, I'll probably add a little bit more in once it's had time to really circulate and I start to see that the conditions change when I test the water. And that's important. I have to test the water in a hydroponic system because I want to be sure those nutrients are still available to my plants. So I have solution A and solution B mixed together. I'm going to take solution A and I'm going to pour it into my reservoir. And so the reservoir, that's the bottom part of our Tupperware that we're looking at. But this is the reservoir for the water. So that's why it gets that name. This is where all the water is going to go. So I'm pouring solution A in. It has kind of this peach color because if you saw whenever I poured the concentrate, it was kind of a brownish red. Okay, so now it's been diluted. And to that, I'm going to add solution B. And solution B is clear, but same thing. It's just going to mix in with solution A, and that's going to be everything that our plants need to be happy. So, pretty cool stuff. All right. Let's get it all. Okay. So that's quite a bit of water, but that's exactly what we're looking for. So now we can start planting. And so our little air stones are good, making sure they're sitting the right direction. So I'm going to turn this guy back up the way he goes. He kind of floats around. That's really interesting, but it'll be okay. He's just a little bit on his corner. Now we're going to go through, let's test the pH of the water as we get started to make sure we don't need to adjust it. To use that, I have pH strips. These are going to sample how many hydrogens are available in the water that are not part of the water molecules themselves. And then based on that, we know if this is going to be suitable for our plants to survive in. If you know anything about pH, you know that water is typically at a pH of about 7. Because we've added these solutions, we really want our solution to be between a pH of 5.5 and 6.5. So just slightly acidic, but not too much. So we've got to make sure we stay in that optimum range that our plants need so that they can survive. So to test this, I'm going to open this up and get it started. Oh, there we go. And so I've got my pH paper. It's all kind of wrapped up. So I'm going to open it up so I can see it. Okay. So there's little strips. I'm going to get it started and then put it back in the little dispenser. And now, there we go. Now we're ready to go. And you can see on the front, you've got all these different colors. Those are the comparison indicators. So you take a little strip, you tear it off, right? And you can see when it's about this color, it's a pH of 6. Well, we're not testing dry paper. That doesn't really do us good. So I'm gonna take the pH strip, I'm gonna dip it in the solution, I'm gonna pull it back out, I'm gonna see what happens to it. And then I'm going to compare the color that it is to the chart on the container. And so as I look at this, I find that my water is between a pH of 4 and 5. Maybe a little bit lighter than that. It's about a 5.5. Okay, so it's between the 5 and 6 numbers. So our water is good. If it came off and it was a little bit too much one way or the other, we could add lemon juice if we needed the pH to go down, or baking soda to make the pH go up. And so those are really easy ways to adjust that number. But ours is good as it is, so we're going to go ahead and move on to planting. And so as we plant our hydroponic containers, we're going to start by making some holes for our seeds to go in. And I'm going to use one of these planting stakes that came with the package that I'm using. And so let's just set this on here so it's a little easier for me to work with. I'm going to go in, and on each one of these squares, I'm going to make 3 holes. And I use the stick for this and not my finger so that I can get down in there. I want those holes to be between 2 and 3 millimeters deep. So not very deep at all, but I want to make these holes so that the seeds have somewhere to drop into and they're going to be able to grow. So I'm going to do 3 holes in each one. You could do up to 4. I think that might be a little overkill for our system, and our plants would really crowd each other out very quickly. So I'm going to opt for a little bit less here. Okay, so now I've made holes for all of my seeds to fall into. And I'm going to take my seed packets, and now we can plant them. So I have 4 different types of seed: peppermint, basil, sage, and cilantro. And so I think I'm going to plant 3 of each type in rows, so I'll have 1 row of each growing back, just like I would if I were planting a garden. Now, before I want to add the seeds in, I really want to get this rock wool wet because it's really dry. And sometimes if you water the seeds after you put them in and it's really dry, you have to add a lot of water, you can end up washing your seeds away. So one thing we always want to do before we drop a seed in any sort of media is get that media wet so that we have a better chance of that seed staying in place. So I'm going to move my seed packets off, and I'm going to take my lid and I'm just going to start dipping these in. And so I'm going to pop one out, just submerge it, and let the water run through. Okay, and I want it to just all drip out, but then I can place it back in its spot. And now I know that rock wool has started absorbing water, and it's going to have some fluid in it that those seeds can use right away during the process of germination or growth. All right, guys. So now all of my rock wool chambers are nice and moist. I'm gonna take my tubing, because I'm ready to put the lid on for the last time. I'm gonna take my tubing off of the T, and I'm gonna run it through the holes that are in the lid of this system so that the lid will sit down tight around my little container, my reservoir, and I won't lose a lot of water to evaporation. That's one of the big issues we fight in West Texas, is we lose a lot of our water to the surrounding air because our air is so dry. And so if we can put a lid on something like this, we're gonna be able to keep a lot more of that water in our system and prevent it from evaporating off. So now I can take my two little sections, bring them together, and I'll be ready to attach that to the air pump shortly. Okay. All right, so now let's plant some seeds. So I'm gonna start with, let's put them in alphabetical order. So I'm gonna start with basil on this side, and I'm gonna plant 3 seeds in each of the containers. And I've made the little holes with my planting stick, so they should just be able to fall down in those holes, and we really don't have to do anything. I might touch the top of them just to make sure they're settled, but it's not like with dirt where you pile the dirt back on top. So I have my seeds. I don't know if you can see them, but they're so tiny. So I'm gonna take these seeds one at a time, and I'm just gonna drop them into those holes so that they can start to germinate. And as they germinate, they're gonna soak up the water from that rock wool, and that's what's gonna really stimulate them to grow. So that's why we want that rock wool to be wet whenever we get started working with it, because that's what's gonna help our seeds get started without washing them away. Guys, whenever I was reading about rock wool and what it actually is, it's named rock wool because it's like a woven material, so like wool, and that's kind of what it feels like when it's wet particularly. But one thing I thought was cool was, in order to make this material, rock wool is basically a type of rock that is melted down until it becomes a filament. And then that filament is whipped into this woven material. So think about it this way. It's kind of like rock cotton candy. Because if you've ever seen how cotton candy is made, you have the sugar, you heat the sugar up, and then you whip it around in that little silver dish. That's what's happening with this material as well. So I thought that was super cool. I didn't know that. All right, so there's our first row. That is basil. Now I'm going to do the cilantro. And cilantro is a really cool plant. So basil you use in a lot of Italian type dishes, and so it's a nice herb for pizza or sauces. When we look at cilantro, we use this a lot in Mexican food dishes and Hispanic foods, which is really cool. I like cilantro really well. You can have it fresh, like in salsas or pico de gallo, but you can also take the seeds, which is what I'm planting, and they're a much larger seed than what we saw in the basil. This is also known as coriander, and so it's a completely different type of spice, which is really cool. So you can actually get 2 spices out of a cilantro plant, and 2 very different flavors, actually. That's really neat. I like cilantro fresh, and I like it on my tacos. So anywhere I go to get street tacos, I always want to see cilantro. And cilantro is really super easy to grow. So once you get it started, it can just, if it's in a garden bed, for example, it'll just kind of walk around as it reseeds itself. And so you can end up with a lot of cilantro really fast, which is, you know, if you don't want that, maybe put it in a container. If you don't mind it, let it do its thing. So there's cilantro, and if you notice, I'm taking my stick after I put the seeds in, I'm just kind of pushing them in, I'm tucking them in, I want them to be nice and warm. Next, I'm gonna do peppermint, and so peppermint's neat because you can eat the leaves right off of this and just kind of chew on them, and so that's always fun, particularly if you have little kids. That's a neat thing for them to do. But again, taking my seeds, I'm just gonna put it into the little holes I made. Let's see what these seeds look like. So these are really tiny seeds, and there's not very many of them in this package. So I'm going to plant 1 container of mint, and we'll hope it works. Those do not look like mint seeds. We'll see what happens there. Okay, and then last I have sage. And sage is good on pork dishes and when you barbecue and in any sort of savory sauce. And so there you can see the seeds for sage, a little bit bigger. And there's the sage planted. Okay, now we're gonna label our plants. And so to label them, I have these little handy dandy sticks. And so I will put one for each row, but I'm gonna write the name of the plant seed that I put in the rock wool. So this first row, this is all basil. The second row is cilantro. Third row is peppermint. And then the last row is sage. Okay. And so now they're labeled. We've got water in, we've planted our seeds. Now we can place them under grow lights and we're gonna plug them in. So let me do that while you kind of hang out. I'll be right back. Okay, so I've moved my hydroponic setup over into its position. This is where it's gonna stay for the next several weeks. I've got a light fixture. This is not the one I'm going to use. I'm waiting on a new one to come in that will arch over it, but it'll get us started. I'm gonna plug the fluorescent light in, and this will stay on all the time to provide light to the seedlings as they start growing. So as long as they can get fluorescent light all the time, they're happy. Then I'm gonna take my air pump, which I've connected to the T, and I'm gonna plug the air pump in. And as I do, we should start to see bubbles coming up in our solution from the air stones. And now that solution is going to be able to deliver nutrients into our soil media. Let me bring you a little closer so you can get a better view. Okay, so now you can see a little bit more detail on the setup. We go ahead and turn off the ring light. There we go. So you can see the bubbles coming up from the air stones. So the bubbles are what are going to help oxygenate the water. We'll also note that the containers are not sitting directly in the water, and that's okay. We don't want them to. Otherwise, we might rot the roots. But as the air in the water bubbles up, it's going to help convert that water into vapor, which then will supply water to the roots. And of course, I'll keep an eye on them and make sure there's plenty of moisture available all the time. Eventually, we will see the roots reach down for that water and grow closer to it and into it. So I will post progress pics of this experiment so you can see how the plants change over time. And I hope you enjoy learning more about hydroponics. Thanks for joining me today, guys.